Hello, welcome to Halo Combat Evolved. I'm joined by my friend Reuben Covington again today, and we are going to be talking about the first Halo game. Now, this is a really interesting experience because Halo is designed to be an over-the-top science fiction adventure. Now, the question is, how do they do that? Well, when you've got a shooter that you want to be an exciting adventure, there's a lot of pacing that goes into that. Games like Deus Ex feature a lot of sneaking around and players setting their own pace. But if you want to have players have an exciting experience, you want that to be a roller coaster ride, like an action scene in a movie that they're playing out and living. And you can see that in the over-the-top design of every aspect of this game. Today we're going to be playing one of Reuben's favorite levels. And what's interesting about this level is they do this tightly controlled, explosive, climactic experience, closely paced, in an open world environment. So, Reuben, are you ready to see how this is done?
Yep.
Or are you ready to show me how this is done?
Yep, so we're going to be playing on Heroic just to make it a little bit more difficult for me, as I'm pretty experienced at this. And we start
I'm
off
completely
on
inexperienced.
the Cinematography with a very, very short cutscene before we get right into the action with what is really iconic in a lot of military games with the beach assault. So you see here,
Yes.
the cutscene's only a couple of seconds. We're instantly able to move our camera around, and we get a nice view of the environment. And you can see the game's aged quite well. But here we go. We're right down into the beach assault. Get us right into the action.
Which nicely foreshadows the enemies ahead of us, I note. Now, I want to make a quick note for the viewer. I'm very unfamiliar with Halo. I understand first-person shooter design, of course, but this is one of Reuben's favorite games that I have never really played much. So, Reuben, please take the lead. What's going on?
Okay, so we've got a whole bunch of allies, and they're going to move up with you, and them plus the enemies, you getting visuals of the enemies up the beach and shooting down at your allies give a really good way of leading the player constantly onwards. As you can see here, we kind of don't really know what's over the cliff here, and we can see, oh, okay, well now there's, we see the next batch of enemies. And then,
one of the great things I've noticed is that if they just put a bunch of enemies like in an entrenched position and said, hey, soldier, go assault that position, the opening becomes very cautious. It becomes very slow. You take your time. But by throwing you into the middle of a firefight, that immediately provides an impulse for you to get involved and start shooting before somebody outdoes you, before they kill your friends, or just anyway, there's a fight going on. You're going to feel like an idiot just standing around watching it happen. So that's great to throw players right into the action and to create that motivation compared to the obvious thing, which is just put a bunch of enemies behind a cliff and let players walk in.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I really liked, if you just noticed a little bit earlier, that once you clear that initial beach, they've then got that second wave of enemies that's shooting you from a little bit of a distance to, again, lead you on like breadcrumbs. And they do this constantly throughout the level, and I'll be constantly pointing it out because I think it's one of the really clever bits of design that they have with their encounters. Anyway, we're given a vehicle here, and you can see this is, again, all this is open environment, but you're very quickly led on by the level design and the way that the vehicle is pointing to where we're supposed to go next.
Yeah, right now it's sort of a loose corridor, you could say, because obviously there's like not too much places to go, but it feels more open is one of the most important things. All right, a little bit of a interesting driving thing there.
Yep, well, the Warthog in Halo is a subject of much discussion, which we won't be focusing on this, but it's very iconic, and it feels really nice to like slip and slide all over your enemies, even though it's not actually the best handled vehicle. Anyway, we've
right now I see that we do have a much more open environment over here. So but we've got corridor section, we've got a section down there that it looked like we could have gone down.
Yep.
So Reuben, this looks like a maze. How are they leading us here?
Okay, so instantly, we've been taught earlier that these kind of Forerunner structures, these big grey alien structures, are usually important. And in the dialogue, they actually mention, oh, look, that seems to be the building that they're guarding. We should go check that out. So you can actually, go down below and hit the enemies that were from that dropship earlier and fight them. But it's quite clear that this is the main objective here in this building.
Right, and giving people a unnecessary side objective that's unimportant is a hugely useful thing. Now, I want to talk because ignoring it feels meaningful. Like one of the things is that when you put a pure evil option or a pure good option in a lot of games, people often make fun of that as bad storytelling because it's kind of silly. But also the thing about it is most people just completely don't play the bad option, which I know surprises a lot of gamers. But the thing is, having the bad option, even if literally no one chooses it, creates more meaning to the good option than if you just force people to only be good. So that's actually very useful. So creating the opportunity to avoid a meaningless fight or avoid an obvious trap makes players feel smarter for doing so, which is really, really useful.
Yep.
It creates that sense of freedom, even if it's a choice they didn't necessarily care about.
Definitely.
Now, one thing I want to talk about briefly is the regenerating shields, because, oh my god, amongst shooters, this is controversial, and Halo really brought it in.
Well, so, the most popular shooters, like, before this, were all, like, health-based, right? So they all had these health bars, such as, things like Doom, Quake, and other, Half-Life, the original Half-Life, etc. And that made you really cautious in your in the way you played, and it didn't often feel like an action game because you had to dodge all these, as much attacks as possible. You have to play as slowly as possible because if you come to an area and you have 20% life, you're in real trouble, and that you could then potentially just get really stuck, and that's not great gameplay.
Right. Now, the benefit of that is it is great gameplay if you're trying to create something more like, again, the game that I love so much, Deus Ex. That experience, where you feel like you are a powerful predator and a spy, but you are not invincible. And so it creates a real sense of rewarding for exploration, for slow approach, for making you feel powerful through stealth and through cautious play. Now, you can play that game like Rambo, but it's not really the main thing. But the point is, you can create that experience and reward exploration. But if you're trying to create an explosive action title where you charge in and you take risks, and you try to gauge risk versus reward, regenerating shields really do a lot for that. But they do another thing. They make it possible to balance the game. That is one of the biggest things.
What we're talking about here is that at the beginning of each encounter roughly what your player's health bar is going to be, because it's always going to regenerate by the end of the encounter. And while Halo 1 does have like a little bit of non-regenerating health, that was actually removed in later Halo games, and they just had this regenerating shield and no other health, which is
really interesting.
It allows them to have this really fine-tuned control of, yes, we know all the time what the player's health is going to be at the start of an encounter, and that allows us to really fine-tune our encounters and make them as fun as possible, and you don't get these areas where you get stuck.
And what's interesting about that is it creates additional variety of encounters as well, because you can base sections around short bursts of damage, like so that you're supposed to almost lose your shields and then get to cover, almost lose your shields and get to cover, almost lose your shields and get to cover, or you can create something that's much more of a classic fight in an FPS. But the other thing about it is, and this is the best part, developers are human. Like, we're not magicians. So anytime we spend trying to balance a harder problem to balance, that's less time we're spending on the rest of the game, less time we're spending making an additional cool weapon, less time we're spending making an additional awesome level. So often people say, like, well, just balance it better. And it's like, okay, we can do that, but it'll take an additional 3 months, which means you're going to get less of other cool stuff that you want. It's always a trade-off in developmental resources. It's like developer time is like money. In fact, it is money. It costs money for developers' time. So if you want to have no regenerating shields, which might be great for certain titles, again, and encourage exploration to find better attacks, to find health packs, and so on, that's okay. But bear in mind that it's not just the exact same game with that or not. It's the same game minus an additional enemy or level or something. But there's one final thing I want to say about these regenerating shields. That because developers are human and because it takes less time to set this sort of thing up, you can do an additional, more exciting and more dangerous combat because of it. Like, the thing about it is, if you have to expect
that here with this fight, like these are kind of like mini bosses. They're called hunters. They always come in pairs and they're really heavily armored. And
that pairs is great for making you feel like, you're being flanked and you got to
yeah,
concern about more than one enemy. You're moving back and forth with your view.
exactly. And the whole idea is that yeah, that they do have a weak spot, but they cover each other, right? As in they've got a weak spot in their back, and I'm about to showcase that here by now that the one of them's dead. But like these are really, really difficult. These they've basically got rocket launchers, like mortar launchers, and they have and that would be really, really punishing in a game that didn't have regenerating shields, because you would get hit once and you just feel like, oh, I have to like auto quick load and stuff, because like you just get so severely punished. While here they can make them really, really dangerous and feel like these mini bosses. But then like in this next battle here, and these enemies only came once you beat the hunters. Again, another thing of
and they're super glowy and shiny to
Yep.
say like, hey, look, go over here.
Yep.
They're green lights. It's like green means go.
Yeah, and anyway, but yeah, and so they know that at this fight that we're not going to be on 5% health. Yep.
Right. And also
yeah.
the great thing about that is, and here's the crucial thing. Let's say you get to a situation where you don't have regenerating health, and you aren't dropping health packs literally everywhere. Otherwise, you just do have regenerating health. It's just in the middle of every hallway. Assuming that you have that, let's say players get to some fight on like 5% health. You need to balance the game becomes unwinnable, which is not what you want, or you have to balance every fight so it's possible to beat without taking damage. Now think about that. You have to make a fight so that it's possible to beat it reasonably without taking damage. How is this a difficult or exciting game for most players? And it's not. That's why often they have checkpoints, so that they can say, all right, listen, at least we can have checkpoints so that we can pace, so that at least the section you can start at full health and have some stuff going on there. But then again, that's just regenerating shields, but even more artificially. It's with checkpoints. The benefit is that you do get, health restored at certain points where you might need to explore those sections. So yeah, there's just a lot of ways to do it, and it really depends what you want. You see, this fast-paced action leaves no time for scrounging around for health packs. Like, this is really the same sort of general philosophy of the original, the very first FPSs were based around this idea. They just didn't do it to the same extent, which is Castle Wolfenstein 3D. Reuben, have you ever played that game?
No, I unfortunately have not played that game. I definitely should.
You really should. It's like the hallmark of the genre. The very first one, really. I'm not sure if it's literally the first one, but it's the first one from id Software, who really invented the modern style with Doom and so on. And so what's so cool about that game is the original Wolfenstein that they were inspired by, they decided to do the game based off of when they realized the trademark was open, is the first game involved storming a Nazi castle. And there was a lot of mechanics like dragging enemies around corners after you kill them so that the other guards wouldn't see them, and it sounded really cool. But when they put it out in their fast-paced first-person game, they realized that was just a distraction, that they wanted that aggression and they wanted the fast-paced play, and they said anything that gets in the way, and they put it in the game. They tried it and they're like, this isn't fun. Anything that gets in the way of mowing guys down, of charging through the level, needs to go. We want fast-paced action.
Yep.
And so that's really what their goal was. A lot of their level design did reward huge exploration. They came from a platforming game design area where players loved secrets. And so they really wanted to create that extra replayability through their normal levels. But as the games expanded, I like to think that they would have very much gone in something more like the Halo direction.
Definitely, yep.
It perfectly fits with their design aesthetics.
And I also, another thing where it's like streamlining is how Halo does its grenades. So, grenades in Halo are just on a separate trigger. They're on a separate button, and that's always like your grenades. And this was quite a departure from quite a lot of other games, like Half-Life or something, where grenades would be another weapon, and you had to swap
that's
away from your main gun to use your grenades, and that was really infuriating because you could basically never use them in like a big firefight. You had to use them in in like slower, more stealthy sections. Now, here...
I remember that. Like that was something that Dark Forces 2, which is a shooter I grew up playing a lot. The grenades never really made much sense. That you would you could have a hotkey for them and you would flip to them and throw them, but you were in the middle of a fight. You didn't want to do that.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's much more intuitive to say, like, somebody wants to throw, even if it was feasible to switch between these things, players don't want to psychologically don't want to put down their gun to pick up a grenade, and it's not what it looks like in the movies. They're shooting, and then throw a grenade with their free hand, and that works really well. So it's even if some shooter people out there are like, it's easy to switch weapons and do it, just learn to play, noobs. It's not the point. It's psychologically more satisfying to be able to map an input to a single button if you can get away with it.
And it's worth noting that Halo was kind of the killer app for the Xbox, and that they actually, this was kind of the game that made shooters on consoles really viable. As in, there weren't, apart from, I think, Perfect Dark, there weren't really any popular first-person shooters in the console environments. And there was like GoldenEye, but listen, that's not really like how you normally think of.
It's a very different style of gameplay to this.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, I remember like one of the characters was considered like minorly overpowered because he was short in multiplayer. Yes. Like it's that hard to aim.
Exactly. And this is actually kind of interesting because a lot of the way that they designed was because of the console, is that and you can see here where we flipped all the way around to the island. This is where we started. That like the main gun that you get is like this really spray assault rifle, because that's really easy to use. Like if you're not used to a console controller, like if you're not used to fine-tune aiming with with an Xbox controller, that doesn't matter because the main gun is this like super spray cannon that has 60 bullets and like fires really rapidly, and that allows you to play the game without having to have fine-tuned controls. And the thing is that they've got weapons which, if you have fine-tuned control, is you can use really well, but they make sure that like a lot of the primary guns either have like a bit of auto aim or a lot of spray or those kind of features that really help really help the accessibility.
Which is phenomenal because the game is designed to make you feel like you're a powerful, awesome space marine who's charging into battle, and that's really very useful to do. And again, which is one of the great things is. With regenerating shields, and I know I bring this up all the time, but like we use this type of thing in board games too. We let players heal between fights and stuff like that. Is that you can damage? One thing I like to say with new players when I'm working with dungeon masters on adventures or working with games and so on, is I do something that's a lot of people who are inexperienced think is kind of unintuitive. Old professional designers absolutely know what I'm talking about. Everyone deserves a chance to feel like they're in danger. Now, when you have a new player in a D&D setting is the easiest way to think it because you can watch their reactions, and it's not an abstract concept of a new player. You see that they want to feel excited in their first game, and it's very intuitive to say, like, oh, let's not put them in too much danger. Let's not attack them. Let's attack somebody else. And it's like they're bored. They're standing around. They're not in any danger. It doesn't feel challenging. One of the first things I try to do when I've got new players in D&D camps or in my own adventures, whatever I'm doing, is I try to put them in huge danger. I rip their health points away from them and let them escape and survive and realize that they can overcome that. But I will have the enemies focus on them and try to rip them apart, but not actually do that. And so basically, if you want to make the game accessible for people, you can not do very much damage, but that doesn't really work very well. It's way better with something like regenerating shields when you can get your health points back to spend a lot more time ripping people down and making them afraid.
Yeah.
Like some of the best experiences when you're playing games like Final Fantasy X and stuff like that, which has a very nice combat system, whatever you might think of the story, is that those types of RPGs and long games with long valleys of lots and lots of enemies with no save points and checkpoints between these long sections, the first fights are never very interesting because you have infinite health. But near the end of the zone, stuff starts getting exciting. You have to start caring about damage. You start worrying, are you going to be able to make it? And then your choices start mattering, and it starts feeling tense, and that starts feeling great. So the nice thing about something with like rapid health recovery, regenerating shields are one way to do that, is you can make players feel like they're under pressure and seeing their health shoot down a lot more often, put them under a lot more pressure, a lot more tension, which again, for a game all about excitement and not about foreplanning, about charging into action and then, reacting to that action, dodging the slow lasers and so on, that is, you're making your decisions in the fight, not necessarily before the fight. That is a phenomenal tool. Whereas if your goal is something more like Dark Souls, where you need to pay close attention, you just want to rip them apart.
Yeah. Well, Halo's... that's why so many tutorials fail, is because they have the player standing around doing nothing for quite a long time.
And being under no danger.
Yeah, under no danger. Well, Halo's first level actually has the ship you're on getting invaded and falling apart around you, and puts you right in the middle of the action, even though it's even though it's actually a reasonable difficulty curve, it feels like a lot of excitement and action.
Yeah.
Okay. So this particular area is what I think is unfortunately one of the weaker areas. It's very empty and has nowhere near as much of the flow as all of the rest of the level. Which is worth noting that not everything, we're giving a lot of praise for what Choice has done, but it does have flaws, which is worth noting.
Is it a flaw, or is it a quieter section to break up the flow?
Potentially, because it does get it gets you can see here I'm actually invisible and I'm kind of stealthing around a bit.
Okay.
Is that it does. The next area is kind of the escape section, the kind of even more full tilt action. So it is potentially a pacing choice, though I always personally disliked that area.
It really looks like a pacing choice to me. That basically when you have these emotional contrasts, if you have nothing but action all the time, it creates repetition. And so you'll notice if you look through this video, you watch the video again, or you play the level yourself, you'll see that there's action leading to action, and then there's a slight lull where you're driving a warthog, where you're, which is great because you're engaged. Well, driving a warthog is actually harder than running. So
yes.
That actually engages you, but your focus is on charging ahead, not on, just walking passively and waiting for the next shooting gallery. And it feels more aggressive and more impactful. And that's great. And so you want to create that environmental contrast, that emotional contrast, that pacing contrast. But despite the fact I saw you just charging through that area, the area looked kind of claustrophobic, hard to navigate, and ultimately might have gone a bit too far on that. Yes. And that's one of the weaknesses you have about these games, is games where it's all about sneaking around and planning and exploration. You have these big moments between tension, and fight, tension, fight, and that's a very natural pacing. Big cinematic, climactic games like this tend to suffer a more difficult design in that regard, because when everything's about charging in, it's very difficult to create contrast without creating boredom.
Yeah, definitely, and so and now we're kind of more in the everyone's closing in around me, I'm getting very very much surrounded here, and that's definitely quite a different experience from what it was just a couple minutes ago. I
love the sense of overwhelming here. You're low down, you got the low. Every time you look up at an enemy, you're fundamentally positioning the camera in a low angle shot. Now, anybody who knows cinematography at all knows that a low angle shot looking up at something towering over you, creates a sense of dominance for that figure. So if you want to create, one of the most famous ones is the opening of the first Star Wars movie, not Phantom Menace, the actual first Star Wars movie. This huge, powerful low angle shot. And what's so great about it is it creates a sense of dominance of the Empire over the tiny rebellion. It's just phenomenal. Great opening. And the thing is, in a game where you control the camera, you need to really cleverly set up your environments to create good cinematography by itself. And so you started with this section, you going down. Everything is a high angle shot. You're looking over your weak enemies.
You were reaching your objective. You were, crushing your enemies. Their resistance wasn't very difficult, and now it's like, okay, every corridor has enemies. They're on high ground. It really works well with one of my favorite enemies, the jackals. These guys with the big glowy shields, because it's so hard to hit. They've got these big shields which deflect all your attacks, and it's so hard to hit them if they're above you, and that really forces you to keep moving and find a way to flank them or overpower them somehow.
And also, I want to point out that Halo's spending a lot of time reusing its environments in this level. And one of the ways that they take advantage of that is to create the ramps. In that it's very easy for people to have it be a flat corridor, you charge in, you fight through flat corridors, and then you turn around and you fight the other way. But how do you make going out feel different than going in? 2 ways. One, the first one is a slower section, then you kind of run with a faster way out. That's one way you can do it. Powerful versus powerless. For example, charging into an enemy bunker, you're desperate, then you get a super weapon, then you come charging out and blaze through the reinforcements. Or the other way around, which is you sneak in, it's not that hard, then reinforcements show up, and you just destroy everyone else. You're under a lot of pressure on the way out, which is what they're doing here. But the second way is how do you make the environment look different? Well, if you go down that ramp, it looks different than when you go up the ramp.
Yep, exactly, and we know that we constantly want to be moving up. Now, up ahead, the Gold Elites, which is one of the most powerful games in the enemy, enemies in the game. We finally get to meet them, and if you haven't played this level before, suddenly being trapped in a small corridor with a fast, enemy with an energy sword that kills you one shot is really, tense, and builds up that you've been able to see this elite in the cutscenes like several times throughout the level, and then you finally get to
and also which is also important because it's not just a sense of building up the drama of that character. Because he ambushes you effectively, it is really important to make that feel fair. And it's like fighting, killing, dead. What? That was ridiculous. That came out of nowhere. Well, it didn't. You saw cutscenes.
Exactly. And then...
But here's really cool is that they showed you the ship, right? And then suddenly they hit you with a bunch of enemies.
Yeah, because you're a little bit confused because like, there's a ship, but I don't see the enemies. And then suddenly it's like, oh, okay, they're invisible. God. Anyway, and...
So it's great. You come out, you see the ship, and like, all right, we're through the level, and then suddenly invisible enemies coming out of nowhere, which can just really put a burst of final climactic tension as you race for the end.
Yep. And then...
All right, well, that's the level.
Yep, and then you get to see your ship at the end, and you have an obvious objective to finish it up. And I hope you have enjoyed this. I've really enjoyed doing this, and this is one of my favorite games, and one of my favorite levels of one of my favorite games.
All right, well, thanks very much. This is Intelligent Design. Check out more of my stuff at danfelder.net, including the Remaking Magic podcast with Reuben Covington. That's remakingmagic.libsyn.com. You can also find it on iTunes. All right, well, thanks very much. Thanks very much, everybody, and we will see you next time.
Bye, guys.
Bye.